What's up, Nole Nation? It's the guys from Plant the Spear back with you for another episode. Thank you for tuning in. Michael, we're going to, we like to maybe think we're a little experts here for Florida State, but we're going to talk about what the air quotes experts think about Florida State in 2024. And while there's a lot of opinions out there, some of them aren't really worth their salt. There's a couple of them that I do pay attention to, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We got two different ones we're going to lean on, and we're just going to see, sometimes when we predict what Florida State's going to do, we try our best to maybe take off the garnet and gold glasses every so often, but we know we wear them. But we're going to look kind of at a more neutral opinion. So we got a lot of ground to cover today, so we're going to jump right in. But before we do that, Michael, how are you, my friend? And thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse, for having me. Yeah, the prognosticators, as they say, they always have their opinions about what they think each team is going to do. And, I would say that oftentimes, the predictions are about 50% right, 50% wrong. You just never really know. There's some teams that are going to be like really, really good. And you just it's easy. Go ahead, predict that. There's some teams that are like, they're supposed to be good, but they end up having like a shocking season. And then there are teams that just going to be really bad. And I think Florida State is one of those teams that has the potential of being a really good team, but also because of just the changing pieces and the changing players, also has the potential of potentially being a letdown season. So curious to know what the prognosticators are saying. And yeah, let's jump right in.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that because, really when we ramp up our preseason content, and like I told you guys last episode, I am like knee deep in preseason content, probably waist deep in preseason content right now. I just wrote 1,500 word preview for Cal, a 6-7 Pac-12 team, but it really reveals to you, what you're going to look for in the upcoming season. And as we know, in recent years, college football has changed so much. It's so hard to really nail down what a team is going to be from year to year. Correct. With the transfer portal, and that's why I try and get all this stuff out. But we're honestly one of the latest outlets to get our preseason stuff out, but that's because I want it to be accurate. I want to be able to let the dust settle from the off season before we jump in. But like you said, man, there's a lot of range of where teams can end up.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we err on the side of positivity and right. thinking that Florida State's going to, we're going to grade on the curve a little bit, so to speak. Sometimes it is good to see what everyone says. Maybe they need to throw a little bit of cold water on you to tamper some expectations, but things still sound pretty good for Florida State. So the main ones we're going to be focusing on today, for those of you watching at YouTube, you can see him holding it up now, is Phil Steele. That's a tough name to go back to back.
Phil Steele. Yeah.
Phil Steele. So Phil now I'm all messed up. Phil Steele's 2024 college football preview. And then we're also going to talk a little bit of Bill Conley's SP Plus for 2024, because these are two guys that I think they get it right more often than they get it wrong. Yeah. So that's what we're going to jump into with those two guys. Now, let's just set a little bit of the stage for 2024. Just some things to keep in the back of our mind as we go through this. You have to remember that Florida State's returning production is at 58% as a team. That is 83rd in the country. Yeah. We'll get to this in the preview. I have it written down, but we dropped somewhere from like third to like 70 something or something like that in his experience ranking. So it is a big drop off. So sometimes the reality check of these previews, you have to keep that in mind. Yeah. Also, the strength of schedule. And I will say one thing that I like about Phil Steele to keep in mind as we go into his stuff. He doesn't just use a lot of simple things like the NCAA rankings and stuff like that. He actually goes into things like strength of schedule, returning experience, how veteran your team is. That's why I really like a lot of his stuff. And he has our strength of schedule at 12th this year. Oof. So that's a pretty tough schedule. And I think a lot of that also, something to remember, is the depth of quality in the ACC. Last year was a little bit of a down year for the ACC outside of like really one or two teams. Right. But this year there's projected to be about 4, 5, 6 really good teams in the ACC. They just made some additions. I think only one or two of those are going to matter. Stanford's still probably going to be a bottom feeder. But you're going to face a tougher schedule this year. So those are some things to keep in mind. But the one thing you can keep in mind, Michael, is the best place to get FSU gear, and that is today's sponsor, Alumni Hall FSU. So go check those guys out. If you're in Tallahassee, 1415 Timber Lane Road, or shop online at alumnihall.com. FSUFootball.com. Navigate over to the FSU page and use code SPEAR to get 10% off your order. So appreciate you guys supporting those that support us. Now, let's dive right in. So first, the way we're going to do it, he kind of previews each team. So we're going to start with what he thinks about FSU in 2024. Then we'll go some national talk. Then we'll dive down into the ACC talk.
All right.
So starting with FSU's overview for 2024, we'll go through the position groups here. So at quarterback, he says that we do have DJU to replace Jordan Travis. And while they are solid, we won't quite be as good as last year. And I got to say, I agree with that. Because I think, in my opinion, I think DJU, we know what Jordan Travis was. He was one of the best quarterbacks in college football the last 2 years. There's no way around it.
Yep.
DJU is one of those guys where when you look at these two comparatively, and I don't think it's fair to compare because these are two different guys. They are kind of dual threat guys, but who are veterans and experienced, but they're kind of two different games of the way they play quarterback. And with Jordan Travis, I think it was, he was good. His ceiling was high, but I think his floor was also pretty high.
Gotcha.
And then DJU, I think he has a really high ceiling, but he has a little bit lower floor than Jordan Travis. And that's just based on production numbers. That's not, trying to be rosy or anything. It's just looking at the numbers. Yeah. But the thing for me with the quarterback situation in 2024 is, look, that Jordan Travis was not always one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He was developed by the staff that's currently in Tallahassee. So that's why right. I think while DJU may not be on the level of Jordan Travis right now, you give him a season with the same staff that turned Jordan Travis into one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and let's see what he can be. Let's not put him in a box until we see what he can be. He's going to have more talent around him than he's had, offensively in a while. And then also, I will touch on that. I think and this is something that he mentions too, Phil Steele, that we are in a better situation past QB1. When you look at Brock Glenn with another year in the system versus where you were turning to Tate Rodemaker, and then even if you had to go to a true freshman Brock Glenn, I think, hopefully Luke Kromenhoek doesn't run into the same situation where he had to miss a lot of time during the season like Brock Glenn did last year. But if you get to quarterback 2, I think you're in a better situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I would say is with Jordan, as you said, he got developed by this staff, and you could see the progression as he got better and better and better with each passing season. And then he became one of the best quarterbacks in the country, last season. And had it not been for the fluke, accident on Northern Alabama, he probably finishes higher in the Heisman race. Probably has an opportunity to showcase his ability in the basically in those primetime games against Florida, against Louisville in the ACC championship game, and then possibly, depending on your belief of the college football playoff system, in the college football playoff system, which would have given him, Mike Norvell and Tony Tokaras, more of credit to see how Jordan has progressed. So with DJ coming in, I think you're gonna see similar progressions. Now, DJ, this will be his 5th year, correct? Am I correct in that? Yeah. This will be his 5th year in college football. 4 years playing on the field, and so he is kind of pretty much what he is going to be. There are small improvements that he can continue to make, and I think you're going to see those. Because that's how Mike Norvell and Tony Tokaras are going to work with him, and so I think. DJ is better than being projected, but probably somewhere around that range of where he's being projected at.
Right. And that's the thing. This is why when I say throw that cold water on you, we feel optimistic about DJ with better receivers, with a coaching staff that can help fix those little things, like you said, because he is pretty much what he is, but you can fix the small things. You can put him in a system that will perform better for him, that's tailored to him, which is something he openly criticized at Clemson. So I think that there is that higher end. Again, this guy was a former 5-star, a top 250 recruit in the entire history of the 247 ranking. So yeah, man, I'm wholeheartedly with you there. So looking at running backs, his rationale here for Florida State is that while they did lose Trey Benson, who was a more kind of high-end back, had the speed, NFL draft choice, finished with over 900 yards 2 seasons in a row, that's a hard loss to recover from. But through the additions that you made in the portal with Roydell Williams and then Jalen Lucas, and then you also have Sam Singleton, who was a highly rated recruit coming in. You also have Cam Davis now, as well as Toa Philly coming back. Keziah Holmes is probably going to get in the rotation a little bit heavier this year. That while maybe you don't have that high-end guy, which, Toa Philly could very well turn out to be that type of guy, overall, it's a deeper room. And I have to say, I do agree with this. I think this is spot on. That's something that we said, in our previews too, where Trey Benson was good. But I think you are deeper now with I think you also have a better variety of skill sets with some more scat backs, some power backs, some speed backs. So I don't think you're going to miss a beat with the running back room. And I think we'll get to the offensive line, but I think when you put them behind a better offensive line, I think you're going to see us, even without Trey Benson, you're going to see us run the ball better this year.
Yeah, for some reason, and again, this is a conundrum, the few conundrums of the 2023 season, especially along the offensive line, which I know we'll get to in a second. But the running game did suffer last year behind that offensive line, and then also you had a little bit of, they would say that, Trey, just like he was trying to show, I think, NFL scouts his skill set. And so he did a little bit of dancing, how they, just trying to get in the hole instead of being, when he got there in 2022, he was just kind of hit the hole and go. Yeah. And he was dynamic in that. Well, then last year he was trying to be a little bit more scat back. And when he tried that, it just really hurt the offensive. It hurt the offensive running game. Plus the offensive line struggled. And you really kind of had two backs that you're really depending on him, Trey Benson, and then also Toa Philly in that itself. I mean, you kind of saw a little bit of Keziah Holmes, but not a lot. And so there was a very particular style. I think, like you, this new room for running backs is so diverse. I mean, you have just every type of back, scat back, power back, receiving back, all of them we believe can catch out of the backfield. And so leveraging the different ways. And then you add in Jalen Lucas from Indiana, the transfer, who's not only super fast, but can play the slot, can come out of the backfield. I mean, he's not going to be your like power runner, like straight to the back, like Trey Benson was. That's going to be more your Roydell Williams, Toa Philly. But man, to be able to use him in wheel routes, to use him as back outs. I mean, there's so many different options with this running back room that I'm actually really excited to see how they're going to leverage playing time for all these guys. Because I mean, they got three really good guys that they can move all around. So it'll be interesting to see how they, what packages each of them find and get. But I'm actually really excited for this running back room for this season.
Oh, me too. And like we said, behind a better offensive line. And then you had a guy, like we said, Roydell Williams put up over 500 yards as the number 3 back at Alabama. And then you also have Toa Philly, who, again, he averaged 9.6 yards per carry his first year. So he's faded a little bit since then. But if he can get that back, man, he's an explosive player. So I really like the skill sets that they have. And then I think it's worth mentioning, too, with the running game, that you have DJU, who we know Jordan Travis was one of the most electric runners that there was from the quarterback position in college football. But because he was a smaller framed guy, you didn't really want to run him a whole lot because he just dealt with injury throughout his career. And DJU's, is a tank. So I think that's going to help open up things for the backs as well. So that's why I'm super excited about the running game this year. And I think it will be better. Now, looking at wide receiver, this is one where we all kind of expect a little bit of a drop-off. I mean, and it's the same thing that he says. He says, you still have talent here with Portier, with Ja'Kai Douglas, with Kyle Morlock. And you also made some really great additions in the portal of Malik Benson and Jalen Brown from LSU. So we're still solid, but he thinks that we will be down some after losing your top 3 guys who were all NFL draft picks. And honestly, guys, that's probably would go for any team. Anytime you lose 3 NFL draft picks from the receiver position, it's going to be hard to replace that. Now, the thing is with Florida State's receiver room, you have a ton of talent. I mean, a lot of those guys that are now sophomores that were blue chip players that came in, the talent and the depth is there. You just don't have any proven players right now. Even Malik Benson didn't put up a ton of numbers last year. Jalen Brown barely even played. And then, of course, Portier hasn't really cracked, I think, a 400-yard season yet. He had like 200 or 300 a couple years ago. So you don't have the proven guys like Keon that came in with 600-800 yards and Johnny Wilson who had already put up 800 yards. So you kind of knew what you were getting. But that doesn't mean the talent's not there. It's just we're going to have to see it develop with a different quarterback who may not quite be the thrower of the ball that Jordan Travis was. So still good, but possibly down a little bit. And I can't say that I disagree with that.
No, I can't either. And the thing is, like, this is probably the least experienced position group coming into the season. You basically lost your two key wide receivers in Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson. You know, like you said, Portier, who has shown flashes of being good, has not had put together a complete season. You know, it's been injury ridden. It's been, behind a couple guys. So this will be the first year, hopefully, that he's able to make it through. You're still missing one super dynamic piece of this room with Destiny Hill being out for the season. And you saw flashes from him as well. Malik Benson was the number 1 rated JUCO player going into Alabama and was supposed to be a top option, started for them, but ended up being the 3rd option. And the 2 others in front of him, had dynamic seasons, but he was also playing with a quarterback who was basically a running back that could kind of throw the ball. And so didn't really look to his options. So he got frustrated and transferred, and, Florida State's the benefit of that. You got Jalen Brown from LSU, who, has not played very much. You also got, again, we'll mention Jalen Lucas because he has that slot ability as well. You got Hakeem Williams, who was had kind of broken out in that Syracuse game, but then got injured and really wasn't able to show much. So most inexperienced room on this team, and I am very curious. I want to be positive, Jesse, because it's Florida State. They're dynamic receivers. They're talented. They got the skill. They got the athleticism, all that stuff, but they just don't have the stats on the field to prove it. And so if there's any position that I am super skeptical about, this would be position 1. There's one more, but if there's any position that I'd be skeptical about, it's definitely this wide receiver room going into this next season.
I agree. I think that for me, this is the room where it could have the highest ceiling.
Yes.
With just the amount of talent. I mean, again, Hakeem Williams, 5-star. Jalen Brown was a 4-star transfer, although he played like 12 snaps at LSU. Malik Benson, as you mentioned, number 1 JUCO. It could also have the lowest floor, I think.
Correct.
If things don't pan out. If Portier doesn't stay healthy. If Malik Benson isn't the guy that we think he is. Now, there's no indication that that's going to be the case. But because, like you said, with the unknown, we don't know how it's going to play out. We hope that it works out. And if it works out good, I think you will have one of the best receiver rooms in the ACC. If it doesn't, it could be not that great. I don't think it's going to be terrible. I don't think we're going to be in the situations that we were, like 2019, 2020, 2021 even. I think your floor is a lot higher. But we're talking compared to last year when you had 3 NFL draft picks between, your tight end and both your top 2 receivers. I think the jury is still out, but I think, again, like we mentioned, it could be really, really good if it lives up to its potential. Now, looking at the trenches on offense, this has got to be one of the positions that you're most excited about. And we'll get into position group rankings in a minute. This is the best, highest ranked position as far as national position group rankings for Phil Steele on Florida State, and that's the offensive line.
Yeah.
So here's it's kind of interesting with this offensive line. So he puts in the magazine that they had the most experienced offensive line they had ever seen with 206 starts last year.
Wow.
You lose 3 key players, 2 starters, Dimitri Emmanuel and Casey Roddick, along with Bless Harris, who was kind of a part-time starter.
Yeah.
And your career starts only dropped to 190. So you are still one of the most veteran offensive lines in the country. Now, one thing that I do want to point out with these magazines in general, and this goes for us too, because, we were joking before the show, like I'm struggling to get a magazine out or it was preseason content for one team, and they cover all 134 teams now. So sometimes when these magazines get written, things change after the fact, which is why, like I was telling you before, I was looking at like Athlon's magazine last year, and they were talking about a team that had a position group battle at quarterback. And one of the guys they mentioned wasn't even on the team anymore. So the reason I say that is because he does mention adding in Richie Leonard, but there was no talk of TJ Ferguson. So that may have happened afterwards. Now, the reason I do like Phil Steele is because he sits down with the coach, via Zoom or whatever, for usually about an hour to actually hear it from the horse's mouth. Now, you're going to get coach speaking there too. They're never just going to, crap on their guys. But he does say in there that Norvell thinks this will be their best offensive line since arriving at FSU. And I have to agree with that. I think when you look at Richie Leonard, when you look at TJ Ferguson, when you look at, hopefully you get a healthy Darius Washington, who, a spoiler alert, he is projected to be first team all ACC by Phil Steele. I think you have more options. Again, Maurice Smith is a guy that's returning as well. And then you have Jeremiah Byers, who came from that G5 level. So now that he's had a year to develop at the Power 5 level, again, you always got a good plan until you get punched in the face. And there's a big difference between fighting at the G5 level and the P5 level.
That's right.
I do agree that I think this is going to be the best and deepest offensive line that we have. I mean, if you think about it, man, a few years ago, I mean, you can't even really say a few because our offensive line has been so bad since probably about 14 or 15.
Yeah.
A guy like Julian Armella probably would have started as a sophomore, if not maybe even a freshman.
Yeah.
He's going into either, I forget, he's either like a junior or a redshirt sophomore. It's so hard to keep up with the COVID years and all the stuff where everybody's at. I mean, you could be a 16-year senior, redshirt sophomore, and we don't even know that he's not projected as a starter. He's probably going to be a rotational piece. So I think that speaks to the depth that they do have. And I think just when you look at TJ Ferguson and you look at Richie Leonard, you look at that size, you look at that body type. I know Ferguson wasn't a starter at Alabama, but he looks like an Alabama offensive lineman.
Yes, he
does.
An
absolute road grader. So we know that the guards last year, I mean, again, look, there's no disrespect to the guys that were here, but again, Dimitri Emmanuel came from Charlotte. Casey Roddick came from Colorado, which was, just bottom of the barrel program. And I know they played well for us, but you just have to look at now you're getting guys from SEC teams versus G5 teams. And so I think this will be the best offensive line that we've had under Norvell's tenure, and I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, listen, on paper, this looks and feels like the best offensive line since Mike Norvell and this staff has arrived here, since Alex Atkins has become the offensive coordinator coach, for sure. And don't get me wrong, it really does. But to say this might be the best one actually on the field, that's going to take some proving. I need to see the proof in the pudding for me, because when you go back to that 2022 offensive line where they were literally running over everybody, no one could stop the run game. Now, they weren't pass protecting as well, but they were running over everybody. And then last year, you saw where the pass protection was a lot better. There were still moments of breakdown, but the run game suffered because there were inconsistencies in the offensive line with injury. There were also inconsistency with play. And so you got a mixed bag. So I'm waiting to see what actually shows up on the field. Is this the year that Julian Armella becomes a key rotational piece, or does he supplant somebody finally? I mean, this is his third year in the system. At some point, you're going to need to see that kind of take place. What about TJ Ferguson and Richie Leonard? Are we going to see that SEC level type of offensive line blocking, pass blocking, run blocking that we assume that we're getting based on the fact of the programs that they're coming from? Richie Leonard from University of Florida, TJ Ferguson from Alabama. And then obviously Washington is projected to be all world everything. Swiss Army knife can play almost any position on the offensive line. So you feel good about that one. You got Keandre Jones coming back from last year, who had spot duty and did really well. You got Jeremiah Byers, who came in last year, different times played, and was really good for the most part as well. Maurice Smith, the anchor on that offensive line, playing center probably. You're going to have him again. And then I can't think of the name that they call him, the unicorn, the player that has always had the most highest projection, but yet can never seem to get on the field, and Robert Scott. What do you do with that conundrum? Do you finally just say, if it works, it works. If not, we're out. So those are all the different pieces that I'm curious to see how Alex Atkins can figure out to get the 5 core players for this offensive line. Now, last year, because of injury, because of a lot of different things, they were rotating. So you saw the inconsistency there. My hope this year is that they can find 5 core guys. Those are the guys that you're rolling with, and you're only bringing in these rotational pieces just because of packages or whatever it may be.
Right. No, I wholeheartedly agree. And I do think that, I will say that I think a little bit of the drop off last year had was because one, you had, I mean, first off, you lost Dylan Gibbons, who was an absolute animal of a run blocker. I mean, I still will never forget the game where he walked off the field. I think it was Florida, where his face mask was crooked from just wrecking dudes. So like, you replace him with a guy from Colorado. He was a backup at Notre Dame, obviously would have been a starter at a place like Colorado. So you kind of had to fill the roster. You didn't have Robert Scott, and that's always been a mixed bag, but he was still one of the more talented offensive linemen that projected to be an NFL guy. And it just he hasn't been able to stay healthy, and it just hasn't worked out. So, the offensive line is it's not a individualistic position. It's such a sum of all its parts. And when you're dealing with injuries and, your guards are from G5 programs and things like that, I just think now the talent level is better than it was and the depth is better than it was. And so that's why I'm excited about what this position group can do. But I do agree with you. I think you're going to have to go see it. You're going to have to see them do it on the field. And I mean, we still struggled. We could not run the ball against Clemson last year. I mean, you didn't do anything against them. So it will be interesting to see, but I just think now that your talent floor seems to be higher and the depth behind them is higher. Now you have guys that came from SEC programs, blue chip players like an Armella, like a Lucas Simmons that can step in. I think it will be better for them. So switching over to the defense, staying in the trenches on the defensive line, this is one where he says that we did lose some high-end pieces in Jared Verse and Fisk, which we know. Those are going to be hard to replace. We knew that. But we're still loaded with guys like Pat Payton, Josh Farmer, getting Daryl Jackson back. Plus, you made the nice additions in the portal with all those guys, the Loholeha, you got Marvin Jones Jr., you got the Durajaye. Like, you've got so many guys that you've brought in. You had KJ Sampson have kind of a breakout spring as well. So I think this is going to be kind of like the offensive line story here, where you had some really top-end dudes last year. We won't beat around the bush there. This year, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Now, I think Patrick Payton, I think people need to look out for him. And I'm going to get to something here in a minute when we get to the S&P Plus stuff, where they project him to be better than Jared Verse. Ooh. So, that's pretty exciting. So I think, and again, this is kind of like the offensive line and the receivers combined, where it can be really, really elite level if Marvin Jones plays up to that 5-star level, if Pat Payton takes that next step, if you have some of the guys like a KJ Sampson be able to contribute. I do worry about a little bit of the depth on the interior. Yeah. But I think overall, this room is much deeper. I mean, you're bringing in a Byron Turner on the defensive end position who's more experienced now. You're bringing in, an all Pac-12 guy in Loholeha, not a backup from South Carolina and Gilbert Edmonds. So I think it's a deeper group. I think it's just like the receivers a little bit, where there's some unknown. You have the guys who they have the star rankings next to their name coming out of high school. You just haven't really seen it on the field for a lot of them yet, outside of Pat Payton and Josh Farmer. But, man, I think if the stars align and everybody lives up to their hype, I think Florida State will probably have a top two, because, I mean, look, they're young, but Clemson's still loaded up front on that defensive line. Yeah, they are. I think you probably have one of the best defensive lines in the ACC right there with Miami and Clemson.
Yeah, this is one of the, like, if I had a top 3 position groups that I wasn't worried about, this would be in the top 3. Just because of, one, obviously JP, Coach John Papooses and Odell, they're gonna have that line ready to go. Those defensive ends ready to go. And one of the things, yes, we did lose Jared Verse. Yes, we lost Braden Fisk. Yes, we lost Fabian Lovett. Yes, there were 3 cogs to that insanely just monster eating defensive line from last season, for sure. But we bring back Pat Payton, who again played so well on the other side of Jared Verse, because Jared Verse could get the push and the sack, and then you could count on Patrick Payton to knock down passes, to force the defense back that way. Well, I think now when you put Marvin Jones Jr. on the other side, where Jared Verse used to be, you're going to find that duel. You're going to find that duel again. And this is another year of Pat Payton as a redshirt junior going into his 4th year in the program, of being able to take on more, to be more of a leader, more of a bulldog, not just a SWAT down, even though he is super lanky and long.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a lot more of aggressive Pat Payton, and they're going to work out those schemes, those games that they play on the lines, the twists, the stunting, the slanting, all like that stuff to leverage his length, to leverage his skill set, to leverage his birth, as well as Marvin Jones Jr., who's not only going to just rush your passer, but you're going to be times where you're going to see him pull back into coverage, and he's more of a coverage-esque type of DN than Jared Verse was. I mean, last year you saw sometimes they would move Jared Verse back in the coverage and it was wonky at times.
Yeah.
I think Marvin Jones Jr. is more so built for that and can still rush the passer. And so I'm really excited for this line. I think interior, yes, I agree with you. I think the depth is a concern. So if there's an injury, your second level of that is definitely not going to give you the same oomph as your first level, which any team is susceptible to. But I love the addition of Durajaiwe coming from West Virginia, I believe. I love the addition of even Grady Kelly, who's going to, no one is saying he's Braden Fisk. We've made that very clear on this show. Right. We're not saying he's Braden Fisk, but he will be able to give you some level of production to anchor down that middle. I really am very excited and confident that this line may not produce the same level of stats, but will be right there close to what we saw last year.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And yeah, he's not going to be a Braden Fisk. He's not going to be even a Fabian Lovett. But I think when you look at the depth players that you got into last year, he can serve at that role. So I still think your high-end guys are going to be right there. I mean, again, we didn't get to see Darrell Jackson until the game we wanted to bring up. But also the thing that I did want to share, I'll go ahead and share it while we're talking about the defensive line about Patrick Payton. And this was put out by Bill Connolly, who does the S&P Plus. Patrick Payton had more havoc plays, and havoc plays are sacks, tackles for loss. Basically, when you're creating havoc in the backfield of any type for the offense, had more havoc plays per snap than any defender in the country with 500 plus snaps.
Wow.
He finished with more sacks, a higher pressure rate, and more run stops than Jared Verse. So that's not a knock on Jared Verse. That's just a compliment to Patrick Payton. And so I think, I forget exactly what the number is, but I know he's up over 10 pounds, which was kind of all his thing. His kind of always knock. He was a little bit light. He needed to kind of add mass, and he's done that this year. So, man, I think he's right. I think he's going to be an absolute animal this year, especially when you combine him with Josh Farmer and Darrell Jackson, who are both, big, like 310 pounds. You got 600 pounds of meat in the middle there. And then I also, like I said, I like the punches that you can bring in, where you can bring in a Marvin Jones behind him. You can bring in Durajaiwe, who's just a big wrecking type of guy, and a great run stopper in Loholeha, who was an all Pac-12 guy. So that's right. And this defensive line, again, has the potential to be one of the best in the ACC and one of the best in the country. Yes. And if they are successful, to me, this would be one of the keys of Florida State being a playoff contender, is staying healthy, like we talked about, and having these guys show up. But the good thing is, we've seen Josh Farmer. We've seen Darrell Jackson be productive. We've seen Sione Loholeha be productive. You've seen Durajaiwe on the field. It's not as much guesswork. It's just, can they, Marvin Jones is probably the most unknown one, but also has the highest ceiling of the group as a former five-star that committed to Georgia. So, man, I'm super excited about this defensive line. Now, going behind them, this is the position group that I think all of us are the most concerned about, and that's at linebacker. So what he says here about the linebacking group is, we do lose Deloach, Bethune, and Jerrion Jones from the nickel position. So that's going to hurt you, because those three guys played very well last year. Of course, we know Bethune dealt with a lot of injury, and Jerrion Jones really came out of nowhere and had a massively breakout season. But you get DJ Lundy back, who was good. I think PFF had him as the #1 graded run stopper at linebacker in the country last year. Okay. So he's good, man. He's just like, if you could chisel a linebacker out of stone, it's DJ Lundy. He's just got to round his game out a little bit more with defending the pass and things like that. Then, of course, you add in Cam Riley from Auburn, who's a guy that's a proven linebacker. Also, Sean Murphy. And then, of course, he doesn't even mention guys like Blake Nicholson, which we know are very talented. Just will they find their way onto the field this year? So I agree, man. He says basically we'll be down a little bit from losing those guys, but you will still have talent. And I think if you want to throw the nickel into this, if you bring in Earl Little Jr., that is a guy that, no offense to Jerrion. Jerrion was a great player for us, but I think you would project Earl Little Jr. to have a higher ceiling. Yeah. He just doesn't have quite as much experience coming into the season as Jerrion Jones did, because he played at Mississippi State. Then he came over here, played a few seasons for us. I think we're going to be fine at linebacker. It's just not the position group that I'm the most confident in. But I don't disagree with Phil here by saying that we did lose some good pieces, but we still have some talent there. Especially, I mean, that the addition of Cam Riley was massive.
Yeah,
I mean, I think if you didn't add him, I would be worried. And even Sean Murphy, too. I know we weren't super high on him after the spring game. Again, he's new on campus. Give him some time. Maybe he develops, but I think you feel better with the additions of those two. But it's still probably going to be a little bit of a step down from last year.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, when you had, Kalen DeLoach and Tatum Bethune, who were experienced linebackers, Tatum, played all those years at UCF and then come over and just really showed out. I mean, I'll never forget that ACC championship game. I mean, he basically single-handedly kept them in the game for a bit before the defensive line took over. I mean, the interception, the sack, I mean, just all of it. He was incredible, playing injured, as well. And then, of course, Kalen DeLoach's strip sack fumble against Clemson, right? The play of the year. That was an incredible linebacking group. But if we're being honest, Jesse, they weren't like, all world linebacking.
Right. They weren't elite.
Sure they weren't elite. I'm sure there were Clemson probably had a better linebacking core on the field that day. Georgia most definitely had a better linebacking core on the field that day. Some of the teams who probably had better linebackers, but man, the way they played together and the system made it work. And so this is the number one position group of concern for me going into this year is who steps up. We saw bits and pieces of Omar Graham last year. We saw DJ Lundy, and yes, run stopper, but can he cover in passing lanes? Can he get the tight end out of who's coming out from having his hands in the grounds, now catching pass over the middle? Can he do that? Can he split out to cover the slot receiver when he has to? Who's playing that? Because Florida State plays that 4-2-5, which in a lot of ways diminishes the linebacking position.
It covers it up, if anything.
Yeah, it covers it up because you got 5 defensive backs in the field there. So, if they're going out pass catches, somebody in that defensive back is taking on that. But then in a lot of ways, especially when you're trying to run, that's where they become really important. So, the addition of Sean Murphy was seen as this thing that was going to be really awesome and great because he came from Alabama. And then we saw the spring game and we left with more concern than we did concern out of that. But then getting Cam Riley from Auburn, is that correct? Auburn, that's where he came from? Yeah. So getting Cam Riley, an experienced linebacker, gives us a little bit more hope. Also, just want to give Randy Shannon his flowers. You've seen improvement in the linebackers since he's gotten there. I mean, you remember back in 2017, 18, 19-ish, it was not good. The linebacker play was atrocious. So you're actually starting to see some improvement around that. Recruiting, that's a whole nother thing. We covered that in our last episode. But I'm really, really concerned about this position group going forward. Now, my hope is that Cam Riley, DJ Lundy, and even Blake Nicholson takes that step and says, okay, puts us at ease. But we'll be watching very intently to see how this group turns out.
Yeah, and I think it does need to be mentioned that now you can have Ernie Sims helping coach this group.
Right.
And so, no disrespect to Randy, he was not the linebacker on the field in his playing career.
That's right.
That Ernie Sims was. So you're going to be able to be coached by an all-pro type of guy, and I think that makes a huge difference. And then, and like you said, man, when you run that 4-2-5, it at least lets you hide a little bit of a weakness at the linebacker position. And I feel like out of the really top 4, when you look at Lundy and then Cam Riley, Sean Murphy, and Blake Nicholson, I think you can find 2. Now, if you go to a 4-3 defense, I think you're going to be a little bit concerned. And at least when you're at that 4-2, you got a good guys you feel good about stopping the run.
That's right.
And so I think that will help this group not so much get exposed. And I'm not going to say they're bad. They could end up being pretty decent, but we'll just see how it plays out. But I think the style of defense, they can kind of just find 2 good guys. And Cam Riley did come from Auburn. He was committed to NC State for like an hour and a half. Then he flipped his commitment. But I will say that NC State, they do typically have pretty decent linebackers. So that makes it good there too. So now, of course, we'll flip back to Florida State's another strength on D. I want to say it's their strength, but man, I don't know. I love that defensive line, but the DBs might be even better. When you talk about Phil Steele's past defense ratings, I love the way he does this. He talks about, the opposing competition, how good of a passing offense. It's not just like how many yards did you give up, what was your completion percentage. They take into account a lot of things. How good was that passing offense and all that. Florida State was the number one team in its pass defense ratings last year, and that was huge. I mean, we know this pass defense was great, but you do lose Renardo Green, you do lose Akeem Dent, and you do lose Jerrion Jones. So that does leave some replacements that have to be filled, some unknown. Are these guys that are going to step into these roles going to be good? But we obviously know Azaria Thomas, I think, is going to be probably one of the top 5 corners in the country at the end of this year. And, I had just retweeted on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, where Big Game Boomer, which, his lists are always pretty kind of terrible.
Kind of wacky.
He did a top 50 corners list for 2024, and Fentrell Cypress was on there, but AZ Thomas wasn't even on the list. And I was like,
oh my gosh.
So you must have meant the first 50 after him, because he's going to be one of the best in the country. And so he still has, Phil still, he says the secondary is still absolutely loaded, and he actually has us as the number 7 secondary in the country. So it's a top 10 unit. And again, you bring back Fentrell Cypress, who was good last year. I think he will only continue to get better.
Yep.
And then you have some other guys that you're going to be working to get into that nickel slot. Like we said with Earl Little Jr., you got some talented young guys to back them up. But man, I think just that Cypress, that Earl Little Jr., and that AZ Thomas, you got Shaheem Brown at safety on the back end. I think no matter who they end up plugging in at the other safety spot, whether it be Conrad Hussey, whether it be even a Devontae Brown, who again wasn't great at Miami, but it's Miami. But he was good at UCF. And then you have possibly Kevin Knowles, who with another year of experience at safety could possibly play better.
Yep.
You may take a step down from Akeem Dent, but I think across the board, this is still going to be a really shut down secondary, especially when you're playing behind that defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I will go ahead and pencil it in myself that, AZ Thomas and Fentrell Cypress, not Fentrell Cypress, the guy from Virginia. Is that Cypress?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was thinking of too many names. I think they've locked down the 2 outside corner positions there. I don't think you're going anywhere else. I think Fentrell Cypress, it will only get better. He played good last season. He did have some moments there, but he played really good. I mean, I think he'll have a breakout year like Ricardo Green did. I mean, you remember the first year Ricardo Green, he had a good year. He had a lot of good things happen, but then he had moments where you're like, what are you doing? And then last year he was like shut down. I mean, he was, shut down corner. I think you'll see Frenchers there. I think AZ Thomas is about to have his Jalen Ramsey year. I am so excited for this kid. I mean, gosh, he's just gotten better and better and better. I mean, he's just surefire, especially if he leaves after this year. He's definitely a first-round draft pick in my book. So I think that obviously you got Shaheem Brown that's going to probably will definitely take up that first safety position. And then again, I think probably maybe Hussey has the inside track from what I've read and understood on that other safety position. Will it be a step down from Akeem Dent? I mean, it's hard to replace Akeem Dent. He was basically the quarterback of that secondary last year. Right. I mean, gosh, I'll never forget that stupid penalty against the University of Florida. And which
was one of the most beautiful plays.
One of the most beautiful plays.
And it wasn't a penalty.
And it wasn't a penalty. And it was so gorgeous. But yeah, you notice that when he was out with injury, that secondary in some ways suffered. And so it'll be interesting to see who they're able to get to step into that. This is like number 1, unworried, have no concerns whatsoever unless we have like a significant injury. This is a group that I expect to be just as dominating as they were last year and potentially better. I'm not gonna say better for sure, but potentially better, just because now these guys have had another year into the system with Adam Fuller calling that. Obviously, Patrick Surtain, who's turned out to be the DB god coach there. Yeah. And I'm really excited for what this unit could do this year.
Yeah, and I will point out that you are going to face some better passing offenses this year. So that is going to hurt things a little bit. And, we'll get into that closer to the season. But I do, when we do schedule breakdowns, but it will be a little bit tougher on the group. But I think they're going to be good overall. Yeah. So looking at special teams here, and I'll just shoot off the numbers here. In 21, we were 104th. In 22, they climbed to 77th. And in 23, they climbed all the way up to 28th. So in 2024, with Fitz and Mastromanno back, he has us as the number 13 special teams unit. I love it. I agree with it.
Yeah, I agree.
There wasn't even a mention of Jalen Lucas in there, which I think whether he just forgot about it, whether that addition happened afterwards, but he talks about Jalen Lucas in other preview parts. That's probably a big addition as any to the special teams unit, because this was I think he was, this is an all Big Ten guy as a returner. Right. So man, that's going to be a massive upgrade there as a special teams. And sometimes when you just need a little bit of edge against a top 15 type of schedule, it could be that special teams unit. I mean, we saw how it hurt us that the year where Fitz really, really struggled. I mean, you see if he can continue to get better like he did last year, I think special teams will be an asset for us. We know special teams has been good under Mike Norvell for, most of his career, struggled a little bit here, but they've got things back on track. But overall, Phil Steele's offensive projection, and he uses a kind of a little bit of a formula here with his computers, and I don't know his algorithm, but in 2023, his formula called for Florida State to average 39.2 points per game, and they averaged 38.8 in the regular season. So it's pretty close. He says that this year they are more equipped to not have to rely on Jordan Travis, because we saw the offense kind of fell off a cliff when you lost him. I think, again, you can rely more on the run game with the better offensive line and a better situation at backup, just a more talented guy who has some experience now. But with only 5 starters back, his formula is calling for 32.9 points per game this year and around 403.5 yards. So there's a little bit of a drop-off. I think Florida State, and I have it listed down here, where Florida State last year, again, you got to kind of couch this with we know how the last few games went. That bowl game really drug your average down here. But Florida State they averaged 34.6 points per game throughout the entire season. Now, like he said, 38.8 in the regular season. So, I don't expect them to not have a little bit of a drop off. I think that's fair to say, depending on how things go. Now, if DJ just surprises people, right, Malik Benson is that guy, I think you could see an explosive offense, because we know the offense was a little bit better in 22 than it was in 23. That's the defense was just so much better last year. But yeah, I mean, I guess 32 points per 32.9 is not a terrible mark. It's you're down a little bit from what you finished last year. We'll see. I mean, you got some defenses in there that are kind of bad, a lot of the teams that you're playing. So maybe that helps you as well. And then the defensive side of things, his formula called for 19.8 points per game allowed last year, and they gave up 19.3. So again, pretty close there. Yeah. Now, he says we lost a lot, but we did reload in the portal. They will be down a little bit, but it's still one of the best defenses in the ACC, which is something we just talked about. So I'm not too far off from his numbers. I will say, when you look at the projections, he does have our offensive points per game at 32.9, which is the 7th highest in the ACC. Now, there's some good offenses in the ACC when you add in SMU. We'll get to this eventually, but I think Cal's probably a better offense than people think. I don't know that we're going to have the 7th best offense in the ACC. I think I'm going to have to disagree with Phil a little bit there. I think we're going to be a little bit, a top 5 offense in the ACC, especially when you look at the rush yards per game, which he projects to be 164.3. Florida State averaged 150.2 last year. So you're gaining about 14 yards per game there. I think we'll probably trend back towards that 200 average like we saw before when you factor in the quarterback run game. Passing yards, he projects us at 239.2. Last year, it was at 251.4, so you're dropping about 12 yards a game. I'm really not even going to disagree with that, just because of the difference in quarterbacks. If DJ turns around and lights things up, maybe that number changes. But over the course of his career, again, we can fix little things. We can't completely change a player. I think that's fine. That's fair. But you also get the run aspect from him too.
Yeah, I mean... That's interesting. That's an interesting thing, because every year Mike Norvell, even in 2020 when we had barely any good players, that offense was scoring, at will on a lot of teams. They were getting blown out by like the best elite teams, but they were pretty much scoring at will on a lot of teams. Then in 21, they were scoring again at will on on a lot of teams. Got blown out by Clemson, but they were still scoring. And then, not blown out. That was actually a close game. And then in 22. Again, they were scoring with a lot of teams. 23, that Clemson game became, obviously, you take out You take out you take out the Florida game and the LSU or the Louisville game,
yeah,
and you take out the Pitt game, because remember, our starting wide receivers were pretty much gone that game.
yeah.
So, and Jordan Taz still threw for almost 300 or over 300 yards in that game.
Yeah.
So you look, every year Mike Norvell's offense has been able to score with the best of them. And so to say that they're going to be the seventh best, if they're going to be the seventh best offense in the ACC, that puts you imagine that's going to really severely affect the record. I mean, you're probably looking at an 8-4 season, maybe something worse at seventh best. So I will have to disagree with him there. I think with the defense there, I think you'll see similar production. It really just depends on, again, who they put there back at safety.
Yeah. And I'll throw the projections out here for the defense real quick. So, and I'm going to disagree with old Phil here again. So defense, he has us giving up 26.6 points per game. Last year was 19.3. So you're giving up around 7.3 more points per game. That's tied for seventh in the ACC from his projections. Now, again, his projections can be wrong. Rush yards, he has us giving up 154.9. Last year was 152.2. So that's pretty much dead even there. Pass yards per game, 208 a game, compared to 179, which we gave up last year. So 28 more yards passing per game. Now, that could be, again, due to a lot of the better passing offenses, replacing some NFL draft picks. But I'm with you. We got to wait to see what the defense does. But, man, I'm just the seventh best offense and the tied for seventh best defense in the ACC. I don't see that. I'm going to have to disagree with that there. His margin in points per game for us in going into this year, he has us projected at a plus 6.3 points per game margin. Last year was 15.3, and yards per game of plus 40.2. Last year was plus 69.7. So maybe the gap closes a little bit. Look, I'm not saying we're going to be 13-0 and as good as we were last year.
Right.
I don't think we're going to be middle of the pack ACC though. No. That seems a little bit off there.
Yeah. I'm curious as to what is triggering his bringing the scoring offense. I think the defense, again, we're going to play better passing offenses this year. They got to go to Notre Dame. They got SMU, which is synonymously known with throwing the ball a lot. And so I'm curious to know what he thinks from the offensive side. Maybe he's looking at the inexperience of the wide receiver room. That could be it as well, too. Maybe he's looking at how does DJU fit into Mike Norvell's offense. That could be an issue, too. And then maybe he's possibly looking at, does this offensive line get a little bit better than they were last year? And so that's probably going to have some effect of that. I think he might have also, and again, we love Jordan Travis.
Yeah.
I think looking at that thinking, well, Jordan Travis was the offense last year. That is, and then looking what happened when he got injured, I think some of that's probably still playing in his head. And I know he's using a formula, but you can skew the numbers. It's your own personal formula.
Right.
And so I wonder if that is the case. I just do not see, when I've seen every year from 2020 to 2023, that offense just get better and better and better. And that was when Mike Norvell was rotating quarterbacks. I mean, we had, Mackenzie Milton. We had James Blackman. We had Jordan Travis. We had Tate Rodemaker. I mean, we had Brock Glenn. That we were rotating those quarterbacks all the way up until just 2023 was the first time we've had a steady quarterback for the whole season until he got injured. And so I'm just wondering if some of that plays into that. I just want to mention one thing too, with special teams. Having Alex Maschermano is basically the beginning of the defense, right?
Yeah.
Because being able to pen those suckers back so that we can get, so that the defense isn't working with a short field has been huge. I mean, the man averages about 40. I looked it up. He averages 45 yards per punt. His long was 59. He's had 19 50 plus punts in the season. He's downed it inside the 26 times. 26 times. Now he punted 66 times.
Yeah.
So 26 of those 66 punts downed it inside the 20, and it's only been a touchback 3 times. I mean, that's a weapon. Skill. That's a weapon for the defense. So it's super important that he's coming back this year. And then with Fitz, Fitz hit 90.5% of his kicks last year, went 19 for 21, was 5 or 6 from 29 and in, 8 of 8 from 30 to 39 yards, and then 5 or 6 from 40 to 49 yards last year. You talk about a massive improvement from the previous year to this year. He is also a weapon if he continues to improve as well.
I agree with that, because we also remember in 22 when he struggled, they changed their style of offense because they didn't trust the field goal kicker. And, maybe that wins us the NC State game if they kick a field goal close.
That's right.
But, a lot of times they went for it because they just didn't trust him. And I agree. And at the same time, you talk about the how he's the beginning of the defense. I think when you look at Jalen Lucas, and then when you also look at Deuce Spann as your returners, that's the beginning of the offense. I mean, if you put those guys in much better field position, you just win the field position game. And you got good special teams and you hit field goals. That's how you can win those close games. And so, yeah, I think special teams will be a weapon for us this year. I cannot wait to see Jalen Lucas. I mean, I remember the days of, like, of course you had Peter Warwick, who was the ultimate, but even the Greg Reed days where
Greg Reed,
every time you touch a punt, you just held your breath because you didn't know. And there for a while, we didn't even know if we could catch a punt. So, we would just, there it goes. Let's just watch it roll for 20 plus yards. So now at least you got a guy who's an electric returner. And man, I think special teams is going to be big this year. So
that's right.
Looking at some of the national unit rankings here, looking at more of the broad spectrum. So he has on offense our quarterback as the number 33 quarterback. And you know what? I'm not even going to really argue with that because I get it. DJU still has not thrown for over 3,000 yards in a season. I think that's probably a fair place for him. You're still top 35 in the country. I think you have that upside there. Like we talked about, if you let him work with the same staff that developed Jordan Travis into one of the, he's fifth in Heisman voting and missed the last 2 games of the season and 2.5 games of the season. So I think they will get, he could end up being a top 25 quarterback, but I'm okay with him sitting around 33.
Yeah.
Running back is number 19 running back group. I guess it's top 20. I guess maybe the thought process here is you don't really have that super high-end guy.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, when you dig into these teams, you start to realize things. Like I was looking at Cal. I just said I wrote 1,500 words on them. They might have the best running back in the ACC with Jaden Ott. I mean, he led the Pac-12 last year with over 1,300 yards, and that was missing time in, I think, 4 different games. So
wow.
I get it. We don't necessarily have that proven high-end back, but you feel really good about what you do have. And so I'm okay with the top 20 running back room. Wide receiver comes in at 23. I was honestly maybe a little surprised that they were that high, but I think you are banking on the Malik Benson edition there and the Jaylen Brown. Now, this is the one that, sing it to me, Phil. O-line, number 5 in the nation. Like,
wow.
Where have we come so far? Alex Atkins, salute to you to put us as a top 5 offensive line in the country. We prayed for times like these.
We did. So, we used to pray for times like this.
Exactly. We started from the bottom. Now we're here. So I'm so excited to have a top 5 offensive line because we know for the longest time, it starts with the trenches. This can make or break an offense. You can have all the great skill players you want, but if the quarterback's running for his life or he's on his back or you can't open up holes for talented running backs. I mean, look at Dalvin Cook. One of the best running backs in the history of FSU behind one of the trash offensive lines. Like, imagine if he'd had that 2013 offensive line. My goodness. So it is the linchpin of everything that you do on the offensive line. And so if you can get a top 5 performance, man, I think that is where you see that offense outperform this year.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Man, listen, gosh, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm still wrapped up in the Dalvin Cook under that 2013 line. Dalvin Cook under the 2022 line. I mean, geez Louise. Like, this is, to have the offensive line ranked 5th in the nation is like a Christmas present right now in July. A Christmas present in July. Thank you, Phil. We appreciate that. To think that, man, we could get back to the days where the offensive line was actually a dominant group and not the position group that we were hoping, okay, just give us like 2 seconds to throw the ball. That would be awesome. Can you open just a small little hole here, please? Please. Just to be able to see that. I love that fact. I love that we're ranked 5th there. Now they got to put it on the field. They got to actually show it. Yeah, I'm surprised with you on the wide receiver group being ranked 23rd in the nation. That's interesting. But again, like you said, maybe he's going off the addition of Malik Benson. But they outside of Hakeem Williams and a little bit of Portier and the other Ja'Kai Douglas. Too, like there's not a lot of production there to be ranked this high. So I'm hoping they live up to that ranking. That'd be nice. That means that DJ and the wide receiver group are connecting really well. They're making downfield passes. They're getting explosive plays. They're catching everything, or at least most of the things that are being thrown at them. So that would be interesting to see. That's an
now I would
ranking.
say like you probably have one of the top 25 most talented wide receiver rooms when you look at that big group that came in last year, all those blue chip guys. But it's like you said, man, we have not seen them on the field yet. Now that doesn't mean they're not going to produce, because they certainly can have breakout seasons. But yeah, I mean that one was, hey, I'll take it. So
I'll take it.
Now flipping over to the defense, the defensive line comes in at number 15. I like it. I think it should probably be maybe a little, well, I'm going to say you just have to factor in.
That's right.
This is national. This is not ACC. You got to factor in teams like Alabama, Georgia, all these other teams. So I guess with some of the unknowns, I think you could turn into a top 10 defensive line. I think 15 is pretty good. I think nationally that's going to help you out just with this defense when you combine it with we already mentioned the number 7 ranked top 10 defensive back unit. I think when you combine those two, that'll make good for the defense there. And then linebackers come in at number 40. Hey, I'll take it.
Hey, that's top 50. Okay.
Right. Like I think with the linebackers, man, this is what we've been saying for so long. Just don't suck. You know what I mean? Like it sounds terrible, but like just if you can just be average to above average, which is what we saw. Right. Which is what we saw last year. It was an above average group. Were they elite? No, but were they way better than what we've seen in the past? And did that make a big difference for the defense? Yes. So I think if you could have a top 40 linebacker room in a 4-2-5 primary defense with 2 other top 15 position groups, I think that's going to set you up for a good defensive year.
Yeah, I mean, all we're asking for with the linebacker group is consistently above average. If you could be consistently above average, not if you could be in the right place where you need to be, if you can fill the holes, make the tackles you're supposed to make, you don't have to do anything extraordinary. We don't need you to do that. We have a dynamic secondary in the back and on the back of you that can make those extraordinary plays. We have an extraordinary defensive line in front of you that can make those extraordinary plays. Be consistently above average. If you can do that, then I think this sets you up. So having linebacker, according to Phil Steele, ranked in the top 50, I feel like is a short little win. Obviously, that defensive line being 15, I'm with you. Like, man, I know there's some better defensive lines out there for sure, but I would have definitely have thought maybe top 10, top 12, but top 15 is good. And of course the defensive backs in the top 10 at 7. Yeah, I think that's right along there. I'm curious to see whose defense has better like overall defensive backfield than Florida State does. I'm sure you'll probably say Georgia. I'm sure you'll probably say Alabama. You might even say Michigan. I'm curious to see. I'd love to see that, like what they go up against real passing offenses to see how they would fare.
Yeah, and now that we can stop all the Fire Fuller talk because we're believing in his system now too, I think that helps now that we trust in him. But yeah, man, I totally agree. I think it's going to be a good year for the defense. And like you said, as long as you just we're past the days of seeing people run in the TV frame where there was no garnet and gold in the TV frame, where there's a ball sitting on the ground and everybody's pointing at it, but nobody's picking it up. We're past those days. So, but let's get to the preseason top 40, continuing with the national stuff. And I apologize, guys. This one's going to run a little bit long on the time frame, but there's a lot of ground to cover. But this is his preseason top 40. And this is his predicted order of finish. This is not like power rankings going into the season. And this is why I like his preseason rankings and his strength of schedule stuff. Because again, this is all encompassing. This is based off factors like home, away, the talent rankings, the strength of schedule, the experience that you have, all that stuff. So he has Georgia at number 1, Ohio State at number 2, Oregon at number 3, Texas at number 4. I really don't disagree with any of those. I think your top 3, that's as much talent and as hard as those 3 teams have went in the portal and done very well with. I think they should finish number 3. Texas at number 4. I don't know that I really agree with Penn State at number 5, just because his rationale is that they're very talented and they don't have a super hard schedule. No Michigan or Oregon this year, but Penn State is in the last 2 seasons, they went 21-5. But they're just 2-5 against F+ top 20 teams, and that's some advanced metrics. So they haven't been able to win the big games. Now, Notre Dame comes in at number 6. You have to play them. We know that's a talented team. They're actually tied for the 8th highest blue chip ratio this year as well. And they only play the number 57 schedule, and they get Florida State at home. Then you got Bama at 7, which, that's a reset. I mean, you got Saban's gone there. DeBoer comes in, but man, DeBoer, I knew it was good, but I didn't know he's 104-12 as a head coach. That is just mind-boggling. And then Bama still has the number 2 blue chip ratio in 2024, 82%. Which they have versus what he had at Washington. At Alabama, compared to last year. Now, they haven't updated the team talent composite for this year yet, but last year, Alabama had 47 more blue chip players than Washington. That is insane. So you give that coach that much talent, Lord, Bama might be a problem again. Then Utah 8. I disagree with that a little bit there, but he's heavily banking on Cam Rising, them moving to the Big 12 with no Texas and OU. Then you get Michigan at number 9. Okay, sure. They went from 7th to 117th on experience chart and also lost their head coach.
Yep.
Okay, maybe I ain't there with you, Phil. Miami at number 10. Okay, I mean, I don't know, but I think what he's looking at here is they still have talent, man, and they have an easy schedule. Number 43 schedule with 0 road games against top 20 teams. Iowa comes in at number 11 because of their defense. And he also likes their quarterback and running back room. Of course, we know I believe they made the change at offensive coordinator. So who knows? Maybe they can score, who knows? Maybe they can score more than single digits this year. Clemson comes in at number 12. And I kind of laugh at some of his projections with Clemson because it says they're a talented team and they have possibly the best team unity in the country.
Oh,
like the Dave Chappelle episode, Unity. Like, that's great, man. I mean, that's great. But like, hey, guys, we love each other while we're losing. So, I mean, whatever, we'll see. But a lot of what Clemson struggles last year were fumbles and missed field goals in the red zone, kind of fluky losses. So I think he figures they get that right. They do play Georgia, Virginia Tech, and Florida State, all either neutral or road games. So that's going to be tough for them. And then Florida State comes in at 13th. And again, he says here that we lost a lot, reloaded through the portal, and a lot really seems to depend on what happens with DJU, what we get from him. And of course, we do play his 12th toughest schedule. So, Florida State, again, could be a playoff team, whether it be through winning the ACC, whether it be through an at-large team, at-large bid, even if you don't go undefeated because of that tough schedule. And then to round out the top 15, we're not going to go through all 40, Ole Miss and Oklahoma State there. Now, some other notable teams that I have marked down here is Virginia Tech at 17, SMU at 22, Memphis at 26. I think Memphis has a real shot. If they can fix their defense, they have a real shot to be that G5 playoff bid. And then you have NC State at 31, Louisville at 32, UNC at 34, and UF at 48. So, man, the thing is, first off, that tells you the depth of the ACC, that you have that many ACC teams inside his top 40. And Florida State, that number 12 strength of schedule, Florida State faces 6 teams in his top 40. So that's why that schedule is so tough. But yeah, man, I see most of the projections have us around that kind of 10 to 13, 14 area. I can't say that I disagree with that. I think we could bump up to obviously a top 10 finish. But, again, this year with the automatic qualifiers, you don't have to be top 10 to make the playoffs. And I think that's really your ultimate goal is to win the ACC and get in the playoffs. So I think we finish higher than 13th. But, it's hard to predict Florida State to finish like top 5 when you have those teams like Georgia, Bama, Oregon, and Ohio State who have absolutely pushed all their chips in for this season. So we'll see how it plays out, man. But yeah, number 13 in his top 40 rankings as for your finish of the season. I'll let you share some thoughts on that if you have any.
Did you say Florida was ranked 38th?
48. Now,
okay.
Now, I'll say this, and as much as we hate to give any credit to the other teams in the state, I do think when you look at some of the additions, the late additions that they made in the portal, I think Florida is a better team than people give them credit for. They just have such a brutal schedule.
Yeah.
They don't really have a game changer at quarterback, and they lost their game changer at running back. So, that schedule is brutal. It's the number 1 toughest schedule in 2024. But, at 48, it's just still, again, you're 6 teams in the top 40. And then if you bump out, 7 in the top 50.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, these natural rankings fit what I have assumed was going to be going into the season. I'll be curious to see what the AP poll and the coaches poll come out whenever the preseason rankings come out. I think Penn State is a little high, but every year though, Penn State is ranked in the top 10, and every year I forget what the record is. I think you said they were like 2 and something against.
Oh yeah, 21-5 in the last 2 seasons, but 2-5 against top 20 teams ranked in advanced metrics.
Yeah, so 2-5 against top 20 teams ranked in advanced metrics. You should look at their record against just top 25 AP poll, coaches poll ranking. It's like something really bad. I remember watching College Game Day one day, and they were talking about that Penn State just does not win the big game under James Franklin. They just cannot win. I mean, they struggle against top 25 people. So the fact that we keep putting them in the top 10 in these preseason rankings,
just like Notre Dame.
Like, again, same thing. Notre Dame being ranked number 6. Now they've had 1 year. They have 2 years that I remember in my lifetime where they actually deserve to be in the top 10 rankings. One of those years, they went to the national championship with a linebacker who had a fake girlfriend and got blown out by Alabama. So
absolutely pantsed on TV.
On TV, like it was terrible. Now I know we got pantsed by Georgia, but remember, half our team wasn't even playing. So
yeah, they were just as existent as Manti Te'o's girlfriends.
Yes. And so you look at this ranking, Florida State playing 6 of the top 40 teams in the country, according to Phil Steele. I mean, that's going to be, it's a much more difficult schedule than last year's schedule was in some ways. And then of course we'll see how the year plays out, because that could all change, right? I mean, remember Florida State when after Duke had beat Clemson, everybody was like on the Duke train, and then you know they lost, and then they got to Florida State and they played Florida State tough for a little bit. Then we finally blew them out in the fourth quarter. So you see all that. I think Miami being ranked 10th is the laugher to me. And not because Miami isn't talented. Like, we'll go ahead and give Cristobal his flowers here. He has recruited his tail off since getting to Miami. They have talent up and down that program for sure. That does not erase the on-the-field coaching and production and development of that talent. I mean, you've seen it over and over again. Miss after miss after miss, undeveloped after undeveloped. What gives Phil Steele the confidence that this is the year that Miami is going to break through? I don't have. I mean, I'm saying they're a better team this year, and they're a team for us to watch out and not take for granted. But I don't know if they're 10th ranked in the country better. They might be top 25, but not 10th ranked, and definitely not above Florida State, because they're also bringing in a new quarterback to a new system, a quarterback who, yes, very dynamic, very electric, also very, very, very turnover prone in Cam Ward. And so, you have the surefire quarterback in DJU, who pretty much what you're going to get. Whereas with Cam Ward, you don't know. He is like a rocket in a bottle. He could either take off and be this bright thing, or he can take off and shoot your house,
blow all your fingers. Yeah, blow all your fingers
out. I agree. You're just not sure. So for them to be 10th, that's the one I question as much. Also, the Iowa thing. We've got, two more. Iowa and Utah. This Utah and Iowa thing, every year, these prognosticators put Iowa and Utah and they say, this and that. And then they're just like, no, they're not ranked. Yeah. You put them up against actual top 10 teams and they're going to lose. Just saying.
Well, if they get Cam Rising back, then maybe you could see Utah's case there. But I agree. And I will say too, as far as Miami goes, and we're going to get into the ACC forecast now, I think Miami is probably our second to third hardest game, because you're on the road, which, that's Oak South. So it'll probably be a lot of FSU fans. But for me, with them, they have the talent. It's year 3. They have the quarterback. They have an easy schedule. I mean, let's face it. We just said number 43 schedule with no road games against top 20 teams. They should win 10 games this year. To me, if you do anything less than 10 games and compete for an ACC championship, it's a failure of a season. Now, I will say this, as I'm going through doing my research on each team, and I spend a few hours digging into each and every opponent. And that's why most of my predictions for the last few years since I've been doing this, again, I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm just saying that so far, the last 2 seasons, I've predicted Florida State's record 100% right pretty much every time. Most of the scores within one score, because I do the research. And I'm going to do a whole separate video on Cam Ward. And it's not going to be just as a hater, but man, I've found some really interesting things why I think it might be more Heisman hoopla than Heisman hype. I think it might be misplaced. Like, and that was actually going to be the title for the video. So we'll see, man. But I think it's interesting when you just look at some of the things. And I won't spoil the video, but it's going to be coming soon. Look, I'm not going to hate on the guy completely because we wanted him at one point, but I think, like you said, it's a high ceiling and high floor. And I got some interesting tidbits that I'm going to share with you guys. So that video will be coming up soon. So just watch out for that. But yeah, man, to me with Miami, I think you should do a wait and see approach. Yeah. And I know this is his predicted order of finish, but man, until they actually finish top 10, they've won 10 games one time in 20 years. And now you're thinking they're going to finish top 10. We'll just wait and see. And I know Miami hated, they're going to be in the comments. They always find the comments. So we'll see. You guys make sure to check back on that Cam Ward video, because I know that one's going to piss you off, but it's fine. Yes, it is. So looking at the ACC forecast for Phil Steele. So he has Clemson, Florida State, and Miami basically tied as number one. I was like going 1, 2, 3, and then I noticed he had a 1 by all their names. So it looks like these are the 3 favorites. Now, the Vegas odds to this, because to kind of separate the 3, Vegas has Florida State with the best chance of winning the ACC, Clemson as the number 2, and Miami as the number 3. Again, in the ACC, he has Clemson as still might be the most talented team in the ACC, which, I mean, they've recruited at a high level for a long time, but they do have a tough ACC schedule facing 4 of the top 6 teams. And keep in mind what we said in the beginning of the episode, where it's going to kind of be a razor's thin margin of error this year with so many good teams if they turn out to be what they should be. So Florida State, his reasoning for us here is we dropped from number 2 to number 73 in the experience rankings, but the portal class makes us a contender. And, again, returning production is great if it's good production.
Correct.
You can add better players from the portal than just having returning production. So I think that's why he's got Florida State as a contender, even with a pretty tough schedule here. As far as the ACC, you get Miami and you get Clemson, but you don't have Louisville, you don't have Virginia Tech. So, you just got a couple of SMU. I think, man, that's going to be a sneaky good team as well. Yep. Miami is, again, tied for that 3rd. He said it's one of the most talented teams in the ACC, but kind of fails to match with production. They were the favorite to win the Coastal in 22, went 5-7, 19 starters back in 23, went 3-5 in ACC play. However, they had 3 close losses, and they were plus 53 yards per game against ACC teams. So now he says 15 starters back in 24, year 3 for Mario. You got Louisville on the road, no Clemson, and Florida State at home. Again, all the stars align for Miami. It's just true. Whether they can do it or not. And so the next crop of teams that he has after that as contenders is SMU, who has the 7th best odds, Virginia Tech, who has the 6th best odds, and Louisville, who has the 5th best odds. And it really just comes down to SMU being, they're a freaking daggone good team. They're AAC champions, AAC champions last year. They're 24-4 at home since 2019, and they get their toughest game of the season, Florida State, at home. They don't play Clemson. They don't play Virginia Tech. They don't play NC State. Oof. They just have to travel to Louisville. So, that SMU's the next team. Yeah. They're the next team on my preview list. I'm getting ready to start them today, and this, we said in another episode that we haven't dropped yet, that this is the trap game for Florida State. And this one, man, it might be tough. Virginia Tech, of course, we know a lot of that has to do with they have the number 1 most returning production in the country. Right. And then Louisville, last year they made the ACC championship game, but they also had basically the easiest ACC schedule in the entire conference. And that's NC State this year, who is his next tied team with those number 4s. He has basically all those teams tied. They don't play pretty much anybody but Clemson as far as the big boys. So they have a super easy schedule. And then you have the rest of the predicted order is UNC, Cal, Georgia Tech, Cuse, Wake Forest, Boston College, UVA, Stanford, and Duke. So sounds like Duke's, he's predicting them to fall off a cliff. If you can manage to be worse than Stanford, goodness gracious, you might just want to sit this year out. And then so looking at the ACC, and we won't go through all of these, but I will give you his we did the national position group rankings in the ACC units, just the ACC unit rankings. Florida State, he gives us the number 9 quarterback, but now some of these he has tied. Like he has Miami tied, SMU tied, and Georgia Tech tied as the number 1 quarterbacks. Running backs, Florida State is the 4th best in the group. I don't quite know about that. Receiver, 5th best. O-line, the best offensive line in the ACC. D-line, we're number 2 behind Miami. Linebacker, we're the 6th best unit. DB, we're the best unit, tied with Clemson at number 1. Special teams, we're number 2. And coaching, he gives us number 2 behind Clemson. Dabo's got some national titles, so I guess you got to give him the edge there. But a lot, he hasn't replicated that success since he lost his coordinator. So I still think we have. And just for throwing it out there, Miami has the 7th best coach in the ACC. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, Miami. And then looking down at the all ACC projections for players on first team. He has Darius Washington, Josh Farmer, A.Z. Thomas, and Master Mono. Second team, Pat Payton and Ryan Fitzgerald. Third team, Maurice Smith, Ventral Cypress, Shaheem Brown. And then fourth team, Roydell Williams, DJ Lundy, and Deuce Spann as a kick returner. So not a ton of all ACC selections that maybe I think we might have. I think we might have a little bit more than that when you look at some of the other guys on this team. I don't see Malik Benson on there anywhere. I think he'll be an all ACC type of guy. But yeah, man, I mean, there's a lot of – it's funny when you look at it, especially Florida State and Miami. Okay, so these are funny because Miami has so much hype coming into the season. Everybody, all the indicators are green, 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 up, up, up. But the betting odds and the predicted finishes and all that don't align with that. Whereas Florida State, it's all red, red, red. Everything points down. You lost all the experience. You lost all this. But we're still projected – to be one of the better teams in the ACC and to be one of the better teams in the country. And that leads into the SP Plus from Bill Connolly. And this one will be short and sweet. This will be just the odds of winning the ACC title from the S&P Plus ranking. So he has nationally, Florida State is the 12th ranked team in the S&P Plus rankings with an average predicted win total of 9.3, which Vegas has us sitting at 9.5. So, we'll see. ACC wins sitting at 6.2. So I think, we play 8 conference games. Maybe you lose one, and you can't win 0.2 games. So it's either going to be 6 or 7. And 7 sounds probably fair. Nationally, Clemson comes in at 14th, Miami at 19th, SMU 23rd. Those are the highest ones. Now, the odds of winning the ACC title, Florida State comes in at 27.5, number 1 in the ACC per the SP Plus rankings. Clemson comes in at 23.8, and Miami is third at 11.7. So over 50% chance they're predicting that Florida State and Clemson will be in the ACC title game. An interesting number that they have here too is the percentage chance of winning 11 plus games. Florida State is at 17.1. Clemson at 12.4, Miami at 11.5, and SMU at 13.4. Now, 6+ wins, again, this is just the fall off a cliff situation. Florida State has a 99.5% chance per their model. Clemson at 99.7, Miami at 98.6, and SMU at 98.4. So when you look at Phil Steele and when you look at the Bill Connolly's SP Plus projections, Florida State is nationally a top 15 team, one of the top 2 to 3 favorites to make it to the ACC title game, and finishing somewhere around that 9 to 10 win mark. And honestly, man, I got to say I pretty much agree with about all that. I'm on the same page. I think we could probably win the 11 games, but, it's a long course of a season. You got to stay healthy and all that stuff. So to me, I think if you look at a top 15, top 12 type finish, make the ACC championship and get into the playoffs, I think that's pretty good. So, looking at where we feel things are for this year and looking at what some of the experts have us pinned as, I think we're probably pretty close to each other. I think we may err a little bit more on the side of better than that because we do wear the garnet gold glasses a little bit. Maybe we dig in a little bit deeper to the team and stuff like that. But overall, it still seems to align with what we think Florida State can do in 2024.
Yeah, and here's the thing with me, the prognosticators can talk about who's going to finish here, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. At the end of the day, the stats that I'm looking at, man, are the Vegas bettors, because here's why.
Yeah.
Vegas don't play about their money. Okay.
Yep.
They don't mess around about their money. And so they have they have MIT level analysts who are analyzing these games, analyzing the talent that's being brought back, analyzing the production, analyzing past coaching experience, analyzing NIL, all that stuff. That's how they're making their predictions. And they're very rarely off, for the most part. That's how they come up with the numbers. That's how they come up with the betting odds, all those different things. And when the betting odds are telling us that Miami is not going to be as good, I'm going to listen to that, because every year it's proven again that Miami is not as good as the prognosticators are saying. The prognosticators, like you and me and everybody else, we're looking at the recruiting, we're looking at the number of players they're brought in, we're looking at the hoopla of Miami, right? Whereas the betting people, they're looking at the actual data. Like, is this saying that Miami's going to be as good? So I'm curious to see how that plays out this year. I'm not saying Miami's going to be terrible this year. I actually think that they're one of 5 most important games that Florida State's going to play this year.
Yep.
That can determine, the season for Florida State. And I think it's going to be a tough battle, even though we're going down to Doak South. I think it's going to be still a hard-fought game that Florida State's going to have to show up and take away from Miami and win that game, hopefully going away. I would also say, too, that I think Florida State has the ability, again, there's 5 games I think that are the major outcomes of the season. That's the difference between going, 11-1 or 12-0 in the regular season versus going, 7-5 or 8-4 or 9-3. I think those 5 games will be the huge factor in that. Obviously, Clemson, Notre Dame, Miami, UF, and UNC, somewhere in that nature there. SMU is that trap game we talked about in another episode coming out soon. SMU is that tricky game that you're just like, this makes me really nervous, but it's not a game that you're like, oh man, they've got to it's just a nerve game. They're going to SMU. SMU has been really good at home, as you mentioned a little bit earlier as well too. But those 5 games, with the caveat of the 6th game of SMU, are what's going to really be able to determine how well Florida State comes out this year, whether or not they're in the ACC championship. I think if there is a loss in the ACC, it's going to be one, most likely to Clemson. And then if they're going to lose, I'm not saying they're going to lose to Clemson. I'm saying if they lose, it's going to be most likely to Clemson. And I actually am predicting right now, I mean, I know we'll do preseason predictions later on, but I'm predicting right now that Florida State and Clemson are going to meet again in the ACC championship game this year. I really feel like that's what's going to happen, and which will be great because that'll help, whoever gets to that ACC championship game. If it's a dual match, it's another feather in the cap for the college football playoff as well too. So
yeah, it would be a good win. And if it's a team like Clemson or Miami that's ranked, as where like last year, if Louisville hadn't made it, you'd have been playing probably some unranked opponent. So that way, even if you lose the conference championship game, it's not damning for your chances to get in as that at-large bid. And I will say the one thing with Miami is I do think they're going to be good this year. I do think they probably will win 9 to 10 games this year. There's so much riding on Cam Ward because if he gets hurt and you play them late in the season,
that's right.
You saw Ja'Curry Brown already made his way out. TVD's no longer there. I think they're going to go to Puffinberger or whatever his name is,
or the Garcia kid, right? He's broken arm.
I think he transferred out too.
Oh, did he transfer out? Okay.
Yeah, the freshman that played us last year, I think he left too. So man, it's just. You could see if one thing goes wrong with Cam Ward, and I don't wish injury on anybody, of course, but if he goes out, they're in trouble. And Clemson's the same way because they have not went to the portal, so they're riding with the guys they got. If something happens to Cade Klubnik, they're in trouble. At least with us this year, they're like we were last year, But this year, I think if we were to lose DJ, hopefully we don't. I feel good about Brock Glenn.
I feel good. Yep.
Right.
Same.
And so I don't think it'll fall off a cliff. But yeah, man, I'm with you. There's a lot of really important games this year. Clemson, Miami, SMU, a lot of big games, much bigger than last year, I think as well. And that Notre Dame game's huge too. Obviously, we're going to drop that 5 most important games. It's just a fun episode that we recorded the other day that I just got to get put out. And I still think Georgia Tech is got a good contender for that list too because it's going to be. You're going to find out. It's like the first round of a boxing match or something. If you can avoid getting knocked out in the first round, you feel like you got a good chance. But, man, we're going to learn a lot about a team that has a lot of unknown for 2024 in Florida State against a Georgia Tech team that I think is going to be better than people expect. So,
yes, sir.
We will see how it all plays out. But, of course, you guys know we're going to give you our expectations coming up in all these preseason shows that we got coming up. We're really going to open the floodgates towards the end of July and August. Obviously, ACC Media Days is coming up in 2 weeks, and I'll be there, give it a chance to talk to all these coaches and some of the players, kind of get a good feel for how things are going to lay out. But this is what the air quotes experts have to say about Florida State in 2024, and that's Phil Steele and Bill Connolly. So, man, I think it still projects as a good season for us either way. I mean, even if you, and of course, that 9-win total does not project the ACC championship game. That's regular season. I have to say that as well. So, man, even if after the ACC championship game, you're at 10 wins and the ACC champion, even if you lost a game or two that maybe you didn't expect to,
right,
it's still a good season and you're still in the playoffs. So at least you can see that everybody is in agreement that for us to lose what we lost, to go from number 2 to number 73 in experience and lose 10 NFL draft picks or 10 guys in the NFL and still be at that floor of one of the contenders for the ACC, that tells you Florida State is back to business as usual, back to where we need to be. And that's a belief in Mike Norvell and his system. So, man, I'm just so excited to see it play out. And again, guys, we're going to be flooding you with content very soon. So stay tuned. Drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode on YouTube. Rate and review on the podcast if you're listening through that. And make sure to go check out Alumni Hall FSU, our sponsor. Use code SPEAR to get 10% off your order. And of course, always remember, plantthespear.com. Our website is where you can find our hub for all our FSU coverage. And that's going to do it for us, guys. So I know this one was a little bit long, but we had a lot of ground to cover, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. But until the next one, as always, we'll end it like we normally do with a Go Noles.
Go Noles.